the Civil Rights Act to redefine the Immigration and Naturalization Act. Is that, boy, they have a strategy.
Come here, Chucky. Good job. Were you gonna go down on your own? Come here. Come here, baby. Come here. Oh, good baby.
Very pointed strategy. It's a great observation. It's a great question. I think there are brief periods of time that many far-right Republicans or even some traditional Republicans would like to roll back. There's the FDR New Deal period. There's the Civil Rights / Great Society moment in the 1960s, and then there's the Obama era. And there's a real effort, I think, to try to strike back at all of those things. The Republicans have had a problem with Social Security for decades. They have a problem with Medicare and Medicaid, which came out of the Great Society era in the 60s, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act for decades. And they certainly are trying to do everything that they can to either launch a frontal assault against those issues, to end Social Security as we know it, end Medicare as we know it. Certainly they want to end Medicaid as we know it, as well as rolling back the progress that has been made in society. I always wonder if the idea for them is privatize. Their position is government can't do anything, right? As though if we leave it to corporate interest, well, they'll act on behalf of the American people because, you know, the corporations are people and they're lovely and they're good neighbors. Is everything moving towards privatization? Is that their goal for all of these programs? Well, there's definitely a strategy, which is demonize, downsize, privatize, right? They want to demonize the functions of government, local government, state government, federal government, and look, of course, can we find additional efficiencies? Yes. Do we need to make sure government is effective in every possible way? Yes. We need an efficient government, an effective government, and an equitable government. But they want to attack government, and in this case, civil servants, demonize the government as part of their effort to then downsize the government. When they downsize the government so that it can't function properly, so that it can't deliver services, corrosive and corrupt.
No, we aren't.
To this American experiment. So let us get to the guests now. All right, so we're very excited today. We are pleased to be joined by House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries, representing New York City.
No.
2013. Brooklyn,
Absolutely
sir.
not.
How are you? Good. It's great to be with you. Nice to see you, sir. How are you holding up? I assume, for me, even just doing a television show about what's happening in Washington, it is utterly chaotic. So I can't even imagine being down there right now. How often does your phone ring or your BlackBerry ding or whatever it is, however the communications are happening there, where there is another 5-alarm fire, reversal of policy, trade war on, trade war off? What's the pace going on down there?
Yeah, it's intense, probably as intense as I've experienced during my time here in Washington, D.C., which included the first Trump administration, included serving as an impeachment manager during the first impeachment trial, including being here during the violent attack on the Capitol on January 6th. But this is a flood the zone strategy that's very intentional, and they are trying to overwhelm the American people with a parade of horribles. And we've got to push back. We've got to be strategic, but we also have to be relentless in how we push back and define what's happening for the American people, why it's wrong, why it will hurt them, and of course, offer a positive vision for what life could be like if you had more enlightened policies in Washington, D.C.
What we're seeing now is the execution of a plan that has been in development, I would imagine, for 60 years, maybe longer. It seems like there's 3 pivot points that the Republicans want to kind of redefine America's relationship with government. The first one's probably the biggest one, I would say, is the New Deal. They've been kind of after that for quite some time. Do you see that
as, this initiative as part of a plan to redefine, to repeal the New Deal, to redefine the Civil Rights Act, to redefine the Immigration and Naturalization Act. Is that, boy, they have a strategy. They got a book, Project 2025. They've been working on that with think tanks and everything else. Are you seeing them executing it as a particular, very pointed strategy?
It's a great observation. It's a great question. I think there are 3 periods of time that many far-right Republicans or even some traditional Republicans would like to roll back. There's the FDR New Deal period. There's the Civil Rights / Great Society moment in the 1960s, and then there's the Obama era. And there's a real effort, I think, to try to strike back at all of those things. The Republicans have had a problem with Social Security for decades. They have a problem with Medicare and Medicaid, which came out of the Great Society era in the 60s, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act for decades. And they certainly are trying to do everything that they can to either launch a frontal assault against those issues, to end Social Security as we know it, end Medicare as we know it. Certainly they want to end Medicaid as we know it, as well as rolling back the progress that has been made in society.
I always wonder if the idea for them is privatize, privatize, privatize. Their position is government can't do anything right, as though if we leave it to corporate interest, well, they'll act on behalf of the American people because, the corporations are people and they're lovely and they're good neighbors. Is everything moving towards privatization? Is that their goal for all of these programs?
Well, there's definitely a strategy, which is demonize, downsize, privatize, right? They want to demonize the functions of government, local government, state government, federal government. And look, of course,
That's too bad.
can we find additional
Sir,
efficiencies?
gotta have the
Yes,
light off when I put
but
my
we
son
need to make
sleep,
sure
then I can
government
turn it
is
back on.
effective in every possible way. Yes, we need an efficient government, an effective government, and an equitable government. But they want to attack government, and in this case, civil servants, demonize the government as part of their effort to then downsize the government. When they downsize the government so that it can't function properly, so that it can't deliver services that the American people rightly deserve and need, then you make the argument, well, because government is so ineffective and inefficient, because we downsized it, now we should privatize it. So it is definitively a scheme. Perfect. It's a scheme. Now, what's at the root of the scheme? What's at the root of all that we're seeing? The effort to steal taxpayer dollars, to freeze funds, right? To shrink these agencies. At the core of it, I believe, is that the Republicans in the House, Senate, the administration, they want to enact massive tax cuts for their billionaire donors and wealthy corporations.
Mm-hmm.
Follow the money. That's the reality of what's taking place. And in the process, they want to stick working class Americans with the bill. And this is a continuation of an effort where there have been people in this country in power who've been jamming working class people, middle class people, and those who aspire to be part of the middle class, jamming them up for decades.
And I love you
And
so
so,
much.
as you've indicated, John, consistently, the American people are understandably frustrated. They are understandably upset. They know that the deck has been stacked against them. Now, as
Jeffrey
Democrats, we
sounds like
probably
he
have to do a
believes his own
better
shit.
job of explaining that we understand that,
For him.
and we certainly have
That's
a
the bare
plan
minimum.
to tackle and dismantle it so we can bring economic opportunity to life for every single American.
That, I tell you, that feels like the nugget, the core of all of this. If we're really looking back and we're thinking, we're hearing now there's a new DNC chair, and the Democrats are really going to reflect on what went wrong. But if I'm thinking about the difficulty with the Trump era is, I think a lot of the diagnoses that he puts out there resonate with people. Government is not responsive to your needs. I think that really resonates with people because I think people do feel that. And for all that the Democrats kind of talk about working people and all those different things, I think they've lost the thread in some ways, certainly in Washington, about tying government effort to the reality of people's lives, right? My experience down there has been that it's a really insulated place. It's overly lobbied. It's very hard to understand how these programs are addressing real value. It's sort of the money spent versus the value, the efficacy of it. But I'm surprised the Democrats don't have that book, right? They don't. Where is the Democrats' Project 2025? Is that underway? Is there?
Good point, John.
Everything you're saying feels right to me. The Democrats have to make this point. Where's the infrastructure to do that? And who are the leaders taking charge of that effort? Because when I listened to, I believe his name is Ken Martin, is that correct? That's right. That's right. He kept saying it's a messaging issue, as though, no, everything's going right, you just don't realize it yet. As opposed to, we've gotten away from New Deal values. Does that make sense to you?
Well, I think there's a few things going on here.
Yeah.
In terms of how we better communicate with the American people, Maya Angelou said it best. People won't remember what you say. They may not even remember what you do, but they will always remember how you make them feel. And I think what we have to do a better job of is making the American people feel that we understand the pain that they've been in economically for a long period of time. Now, this moment, you have a situation where you had post-pandemic inflation that hit everyday Americans hard. And of course, many Americans are going to see the economy not through the lens of macroeconomic numbers. What am I paying for food or groceries or gas or housing? And the cost of living in America is too high. And we've got to be clear that our top objective is to do something about it, to make life more affordable for the American people, to bring down housing costs and food costs and gas prices and childcare costs and utility costs and the cost of insurance, where it's out of control and it's robbing people of the ability to own homes. But we also have to zoom out a little bit, because there's been a decades-long march to sticking it to working class people. And I think as a result, you have every now and then people who can come along the political scene and exploit the pain economically that people are in for their own political gain.
You make a great point. I think it in some ways amplifies the thing I'm trying to get at, which is, you just said it's a decades-long march. Where have the Democrats been over those decades? Like, if I'm living in an area of entrenched economic pain, right, and I've got a party saying we've got to understand what you're going through and we've got to do something, at a certain point, those are just platitudes. You know, you've got Trump out there going, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to deport these people, trans people. They're the ones that are causing your problem. These people are going. Everything is specific and
Hi, Austin.
pointed and planned, right? Where is that? Like, what's the playbook to express in specifics the very thing you just said? 4 decades, this has been going on, where there's a disconnect between the pain of the people and the power and actions of the government.
So politically, I think one of the reasons why we've seen the pendulum swing back and forth, it went from George H.W. Bush to Bill Clinton to George W. Bush, George W. Bush to Barack Obama to Donald Trump to Joe Biden, back to Donald Trump. And
You're getting me dizzy.
it's a dizzying swing of the pendulum with very different people who have very different ideologies. What's consistent? The American people have a constant desire for change. Why? Because no one has solved the fundamental problem.
That's interesting.
Now, here's the thing about Democrats. Under Barack Obama, we did deal with the healthcare affordability crisis. The Affordable Care Act has been transformational. it has ensured that tens of millions of people who otherwise would not have had access to high quality healthcare have it. That's progress for the American people, but we of course have to do more. Under Joe Biden, you did see steps that were taken to try to bring down costs, particularly in the area of prescription drug pricing, and steps to bring jobs back to the American people through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, all designed. How do we bring domestic manufacturing jobs back home to America? Enough with our jobs going in the other direction.
Right.
So we were doing the work. Perhaps we were not speaking as forcefully as necessary to say, you know what? We understand that y'all have been getting jammed up in the communities that I represent. It's been happening. And John, here's the thing. You can actually point to several different ways in which the deck has been stacked against everyday Americans. Poorly negotiated trade deals, the outsourcing of good paying American jobs, the dramatic decline in unionization, and the rise of automation. And yes, the innovation economy is important and we have to continue to lead developments in the innovation economy, but automation has cost good paying American jobs.
No question.
You add those factors together and you have a middle class that has been in decline in relative terms. And the American people are smart enough to know, wait a second, my life was supposed to be better than the lives of my parents, whose lives were better than their grandparents, and my children's lives, consistent with the American dream, should be better than mine. But that appears to be broken. So we have to fix it, and we have to fix it decisively. But in order to convince the American people that we're prepared to fix it, we have to be very clear that we understand that this has been a problem for a long period of time, and we haven't yet collectively been able to turn around this dynamic with the comprehensive, decisive action necessary.
I think that's a fabulous way of sort of laying out the task at hand, and it's a big one. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. It's a difficult one. I wonder if, in your mind, when you're down there with the Democratic Party, do they understand that their role in creating that world? So, like we talk about NAFTA through the Clinton, you laid out very nicely these different eras. There was sort of HW and then Clinton and then Bush and then Obama. But things like NAFTA, things like allowing the sort of trickle down policies to continue through deregulation. Do they understand that maybe even the way that Democrats want to help people access these good things, they have to rethink how government delivers those services? Let's talk about a specific example, which is the ACA, which I think is really interesting. It has gotten, I don't know how many millions of people health insurance, but the way that it's done it is sort of a Republicanized, almost like a privatization. It's kind of, if you will, a subsidy to the insurance companies. A promise that, like, look, if you take people with pre-existing conditions, we'll give you from the government $500 a month to subsidize these plans that we will have access to. But we're not going to fix what's at the heart of our healthcare system, and we're not going to fix what's at the heart of our insurance system. So those two frustrations still exist, and they get compounded by the overwhelming cost of this program. Are the Democrats not thinking big enough to change the relationship between, this whole idea of having to fight to lower insulin costs, as though that's like, we got 10 drugs that we can now negotiate with. Like, don't they have to be clearer, stronger, and change that relationship to get government to deliver these services directly and effectively?
Well, I think the Affordable Care Act, it's been an interesting journey. And,
I like that phrase.
No, a very important one.
Yes.
In terms of what has happened, transformationally, you're talking about more than 100 million Americans with pre-existing healthcare conditions who now have coverage because of the Affordable Care Act, who otherwise would be left to the public market, the insurance market, and healthcare insurers, many of whom would have no intention of allowing them access to the healthcare that they need to live. That's more than 100 million Americans, young people who have transitioned out of college or hit age 21, but were in high school. At that point, they would generally have lost their insurance coverage. They could not continue to be on their parents' plan. Now that was extended to the age of 26 has been transformational. We've made the point through the Affordable Care Act that being a woman is not a pre-existing condition. It is not a reason to deny healthcare coverage. And before the Affordable Care Act, it had been. But I think the biggest success in some ways of the Affordable Care Act was Republicans were obsessed about taking back until finally politically the American people said enough. And we took the House back in 2018, and they've pretended not to want to touch the Affordable Care Act ever since, but if they got a chance, they would. Is that when that battle was being waged, and I wasn't in Congress at the time, right, it was still unclear, John, in America, whether healthcare was a right or a privilege. That was an open question. It's no longer an open question. We at least understand that access to high quality, affordable healthcare is a right in the United States of America. Now we have to continue to bring that right fully to life.
Right. I think that's kind of my point is the ACA has done some really great things for people, but doesn't it reinforce an existing corrupt system? So if you think about the Republican strategy, right? The Republican strategy is I'm going to get rid of abortion in America. And I'm going to work for 50 years, and if we can't make it illegal, we'll make it impossible. But we are relentlessly focused on this goal, which is to make it illegal. And they're going to take the court track. They're going to take the, okay, if you're going to provide that care, you need to have an anesthesiologist, and they'll make it impossibly financially for places that want to accomplish that. I think Democrats my point is, are they too comfortable within a system that seems not to be delivering? And do we need to take an approach that is more clear and direct to say to people, like, if healthcare is a right, I'm not sure that the ACA is the most efficient way of delivering that right.
I think it's a fair question, certainly that you're asking, but the way that healthcare has developed in the United States of America has been a far too cumbersome and complicated system. And what we've seen is a series of steps that have been taken to try to make it as equitable as possible. You've got Medicare, and then Medicaid, and then the Child Health Insurance Program that was put into place during the Clinton era, and then the transformational work of the Affordable Care Act, and then the subsidies that were enhanced during the Biden administration. Now, this is a long journey, but that's taken us to a place where about 90 to 95% of the American people now have access to insurance, in addition to, of course, what takes place in the private market with employer-based healthcare. But there are still gaps. There are still flaws.
My point is, in your perfect world, would you say this system, first of all, we don't need to tie healthcare to your job. That limits people's liberty and freedom. And we don't need to give subsidies to an insurance company. It's almost like what Trump understands is I can use the government to bully, right? I wonder if Democrats can take that message and say, oh, right, why aren't we playing by that same rule? If we were redesigning the system, is this the way we would design it? And if not, then how do we take a hard line to get that system to deliver?
Yeah, well, I think that point that you make about leveraging the ability of the government to bring about the best possible result for the American people is something that certainly we have to continue to lean into in the healthcare space and in every other space as it relates to improving the quality of life of the American people. I will say that one of the most important things that was accomplished in the previous administration is to give the federal government the ability to negotiate drug prices on behalf of the American people using the federal government's bulk price purchasing power.
Right.
The idea was, now it's limited to Medicare recipients, that's tens
Right.
of millions of people, and we got to expand it out,
Which is crazy.
right? We got to expand it out.
Yes.
But here was the theory, John. Wait a second. Walmart and Target and Best Buy are able to use their bulk price purchasing power
Right.
to negotiate lower prices that they then present to the consumers, and it increases their profitability because they can get a broader share of the market. Shouldn't the federal government be able to use that same market-based principle on behalf of the American people?
Oh, yes.
So that is what we're working on. We have made progress in that direction because now the federal government can do it for Medicare recipients. The Republicans rejected expanding out that power to everyone. We'll continue to press forward for it.
Does this change the way that you look at the presidency, what's happening right now? Like, do you think in your mind now, well, the next time we're fortunate enough to create a message that resonates enough with the American people, and we get a Democratic president that first day one, executive order number one, the government negotiates drug price deals with the drug companies, benefit managers out of the game. Like, we're going to attack this much more directly. We are not going to the din of all the lobbyists of all these different industries. We're cutting that out, and we're making this much cleaner to the way that we want to operate.
We're definitely going to make the system as clean as possible and continue to build upon the work that has been done. I will say that given the flood of outrageous behavior, extreme behavior,
Yes.
you know, thinking about 2028 at this moment for me is a luxury. It's a luxury.
It is. I would admit that. So you had an emergency meeting with the caucus. Yes.
That's right.
Was that the House and the Senate, or just the House?
That was just the House. That was last week. It was a virtual meeting because we were all spread out across the country, back home in our districts. And that was in response to the unlawful, illegal Office of Management and Budget so-called funding freeze that was clear overreach. The American people rose up. I think it was announced on January 27th, this funding freeze. By January 29th, it was rescinded.
But they said they only rescinded the memo. The freeze is still in place, or is that incorrect?
I think what they were referring to is that the blanket freeze is gone. Now, it's temporarily gone, and we're going to continue to press forward to make sure that it's permanently gone. What has not been rescinded were some of the executive orders that froze precise funding in certain areas that he issued on day one and day two. For example, the freeze as it relates to foreign aid.
Oh, that's the USAID, and that wasn't. Is that even the president, or is that Vice President Musk? Is he the one who froze USAID?
It's a reasonable question to ask who's actually running things right now, because Elon Musk seems to have an extraordinary amount of power, and certainly my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, House Republicans, are bending over backwards to do his bidding.
Can I tell you my favorite tweet that he put out? It was something about last week and about agencies. It was something about, like, who are these unelected bureaucrats who have all this power over our lives? And you're just like, I think they're you. I think you're that person. But what recourse is there other than outrage? I think the frustrating thing for a lot of people watching at home is, at this point, the recourse seems to be, let's put Chuck Schumer on television to give as non dramatic a reading as he can of the outrage. What is the real recourse? Can there be temporary injunctions? Is there a Congress? Have the Republicans just decided we're just going to give it all to the executive, and we no longer have the power of appropriation? We're just going to go along with all of this. What is the recourse for an opposition party that doesn't control the House, the Senate, the executive, or the judiciary?
It's an all hands on deck effort. We got to make sure that we push back in the Congress, push back in the courts, and push back in the community, particularly as it relates to shaping public sentiment, which we have seen can be decisive. Abraham Lincoln once made the observation that public sentiment is everything. With it, Nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. Public sentiment rose up in response to the funding freeze. They backed off. Public sentiment rose up in response to the overly broad tariffs related to our North American allies. The market also weighed in, and all of a sudden, they backed off. 2 days later. So we are seeing that public sentiment can be an important vehicle, but we also have to push back in Congress. And by the way, at the end of last year, when both the incoming president at the time and Elon Musk tried to tank a spending agreement that had been negotiated in a bipartisan way because they demanded, the nerve of these people, they demanded that we give the president a $4 or $5 trillion blank check by suspending the debt ceiling for the entirety of his presidency so he could pass massive tax cuts for his billionaire friends and wealthy corporations. Our response was not simply no, politely, it was hell no. And the Congress defeated that bill. The Democrats and a handful of Republicans, but Democrats could have done it on our own, and we showed that in that context. And so there will continue to be legislative pushback, and I think it's also important, John, to understand that, listen, Donald Trump won the popular vote this time around. He lost the popular vote in 2016. He lost the popular vote in 2016. He comes into Congress. There are 241 Republicans in the House, only 194 Democrats. This time around, so-called mandate, he wins the popular vote, and currently there are 218 Republicans in the House and 215 Democrats. It's the narrowest majority since the Great Depression.
Oh, that doesn't portend well. Anything that relates back to it's the last time that happened since the Great Depression, that's not a good sign.
Right, not a good sign. And then what happened immediately thereafter was FDR's election, bringing about a true golden age for America, or the beginnings of it, as he battled through the Great Depression. So I think we certainly are going to stick together. Listen, we'll work with anyone in order to solve the core problems, which, how do we drive down the high cost of living for the American people? How do we bring the American dream to life? But we're going to push back against far-right extremism whenever necessary. The courts will do that as well. I think that executive order related to birthright citizenship was issued either on January 20th or January 21st, 2 or 3 days later. A judge appointed by Ronald Reagan struck down the effort to eliminate birthright citizenship because it's unconstitutional. And we've seen now more than 20 different lawsuits have been brought related to 11 different executive orders, and that righteous litigation will also continue moving forward.
Are there people within the Republican caucus? Now, I know that people always say what they say on CNN or Fox or MSNBC is not necessarily how you guys talk with each other. I would imagine there's a good bit of trepidation, even amongst the Republican caucus, about a little bit of the chaos that is being brought through this first couple of weeks. Are there allies that you think will have the courage to work with you on reasonable stuff? Because even though the majority that they have in the House is less, the House is a zero-sum game. If you've got one extra one, you control everything. It's not like the Senate. So you really are on the back foot, hoping that Chip Roy is crazy enough that he'll tank whatever it is that they throw out there. But are there, I guess, is there any political courage to curb the worst excesses of the vindictiveness? Because you don't sort of see it, like they're talking about, we need to make government more efficient, and they basically got rid of all the IGs, which are their reports, which Congress generally ignores anyway. But at least they identified areas of waste, fraud, and abuse generally.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's absolutely the right question in terms of congressional dynamics. And here's the thing: all we need is 3,
Right.
on any given issue to stop bad things from happening, particularly as it relates to the congressional power of the purse, which you brought up. By the way, this is a constitutional thing.
Right.
I thought my colleagues were originalists. I thought they believed in the text of the Constitution, which is that the power of the purse belongs to the Congress generally, and in Article 1, I think it's Section 9, Clause 7, the House in particular.
Did you just Section 9 Clause 7 me, Leader Jeffries? That's very pleasing to me. That's like talking to Doris Kearns Goodwin, for God's sakes. Throwing out clauses and articles and things that are going on there. Is there someone you call? Like, do you call Mike Johnson to go like, so are we not active anymore? Like, or have we over the years done emergency powers to the president, and Trump is just using those levers in a way that's legal and won't be objected to by these congressional members because they're fearful. Like, even that idea of we just need 3, I don't know if there's 3 courageous individuals in that caucus.
What I can tell you is that there's definitely 15 or 20 who are in swing districts who, if they are seen as supporting or excusing or remaining silent about the extremism, the efforts to end Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security as we know it, to basically rob from the American people, they're going to face some electoral consequences in the general election in 2026. And the question is, are they willing to step up? We just need 3 on any given issue. You're right. I have said to Speaker Johnson in my conversations that Congress has to reassert the power of the purse. We can't have a situation where we are agreeing to appropriate money in the best interest of the American people. It's then signed into law, and a president, based on a signature, can wipe it all away. Now, we believe that at the end of the day, the courts will take much of this activity down, but we have an opportunity over the next month or so, as we continue to negotiate the upcoming spending agreement, to reassert ourselves for the American people, for the good of the American people, as opposed to what some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are trying to do. They want government of the billionaires, by the billionaires, and for the billionaires. Give me a break. We can't let that happen.
Do you think that the Democrats are in a position, or have they eroded their credibility with working people over these, past decades, to the point where that argument can resonate enough? It's always something that strikes me a bit with the argument of billionaires have to pay their fair share, and couldn't agree more. But I think it doesn't resonate with people if they're worried that money won't be spent to give us value directly. Is that part of the calculus as the Democrats figure out their path forward? How do we not just speak the rhetoric of working class, but how do we regain the confidence of people, the trust of people, that this government money will be? Because if we don't tie it to value, the Republicans are doing the opposite. Their thing is, I'm going to get rid of all of USAID, so we're going to destroy the government without concern for value.
Here we fucking
The
go.
question is, can Democrats convince people we're going to rebuild it with that concern for value?
Yeah, I think we have to, this takes it back to the core issue of what, as Democrats, are we trying to accomplish? And I think our core proposition is, look, we have to rebuild the American dream. It's been broken. And here's what the American dream means to us. That when you work hard in America and play by the rules, you should be able to provide a comfortable living for yourself, for your family, educate your children, purchase a home, go on vacation every now and then, have access to high quality and affordable health care, and then one day retire with grace and dignity so you can enjoy your grandkids. That's not too much to ask in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, but for far too many people, it's not available. So I think first we have to connect with everyday Americans on the core value proposition that we're offering, which is bring back to life the American dream. And then we can discuss the policy proposals that we have in order to accomplish that.
The particulars that would get there. And who's doing that work, I guess, is while you guys are in the maelstrom as chaos reigns around you, the Republicans seem to have an infrastructure funneled by their right-wing billionaires that have a real ideological bent to them. Plans that are as specific and laid out, and they've got a little book. So who builds that book? Who directs it? And are the Democrats organized enough, unified enough, and unified in that way to build that, the specifics of that can redefine and reanimate that New Deal spirit that worked to connect with people and value in the 30s. Who's doing that now?
Well, that's definitely an ongoing conversation that can now intensify, as we are engaging in the day-to-day legislative battles in the trenches, and we have to continue to do that, with intensity. But at the same period of time, think about what the next year and what the next midterm look like, and how do we communicate with the American people in a more compelling fashion. And so that's a conversation between House Democrats, Senate Democrats, between the governors, and between the DNC. We also need the DNC to make sure that we do build out that robust communication mechanism so we can reach the American people where they are, and not simply through the traditional mechanisms, because we'll never reach the people that we need to reach, who only casually, at best, understandably follow politics because they are living day to day, week to week, month to month. That's why one of the things that we try to do as House Democrats is stay connected, stay on the ground, stay in the community, talk to the people that you represent about the problems they actually want us to solve. That's the best focus group, the people that we actually represent.
Do you think these answers are going to come out of Washington? I think sometimes we forget that there's real leadership at the state level. There's a lot of really talented and committed people working at the state level, at the local level. I remember coming to Congress when we had our first burn pit bills. And we got together that for Country Caucus. It was Republicans and Democrats. And we talked to them about, here's this situation that veterans have been facing when they come back from the war on terror. Here are the terrible consequences. Here's the list of diseases that are, and they said, oh, this is terrible. We would love to do something about this. Could you write that bill up? And I remember thinking, like, wait, what? I thought that was, does Congress have the ability to juggle that? I still feel like this country's held together by hundreds of legislative aides that are working, tirelessly. First one's in, last one's out, making these things work. But do you think it's something that's actually going to come more from, are the states and the localities more equipped to bring that to bear, what you're talking about, that connection to the people?
Well, I definitely think it's all of the above. Everybody who has the opportunity to serve in public office has to engage, right, at a maximum level, because that's what the moment calls for right now. By the way, we also need people to run for something, right? Everyday Americans.
All right, what do you need? Talk to me. What do you want? Mayor of what? What do you want?
Anything.
All right.
Anything. I think you'd be an amazing candidate because you keep it real, right? And it's how you make the American people feel. And, but I do think this point about making sure that all of us, stay connected on the ground is incredibly important, because the American people are thinking about a lot of different things. And many are outraged and horrified at what's taking place, but there's a flood of...
Fucked up because I genuinely want to hear the end of this conversation, but I do not have time. I have work to do. Therefore, here's my reaction. I really like Hakeem Jeffries. I think he's a mostly sincere fellow. He's on the wrong team, but I don't hold it against him too much. I can't wait to recruit him to be a good Democratic Republican like me.